So a few months back, I asked my buddy Terry to join me for a collab here on the channel to talk about a Linda Blair film called Hell Night. It's a film that my mom asked me to review forever ago, and I just haven't really got around to it. So I figured, perfect timing, we're moving on into October, let me ask Terry to join me. Well, some time went by and it never really happened, and then I ended up reaching out to him again, and he's like, I got you, I'll send it to you soon. And he did. Except he ended up sending me something for Motel Hell instead of Hell Night. So we decided to turn this into a positive and check out this movie I'd never seen before. So let's do this. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video, and in today's video we're going to be talking about Motel Hell. Also, to my mom, I know Hell Night, I will do it soon enough. It's Terry's fault, but this is a very interesting movie, and I think it's funny that this happened. I actually like that this did happen. So, also a big thanks to my guest Terry for joining me here in this video. You guys can find the link to his channel down below in the description box. He does tons of classic cinema over on his channel, a lot of foreign films as well, and he's got a sweet Australian accent, so you can't really beat that. So if you guys are looking for somebody who talks about films on YouTube, but talks about a lot of films that you don't really usually see people talking about here on YouTube, I highly recommend going over to his channel. Go give him some love and check it out. And so yeah, let's go ahead and jump into my initial thoughts on Motel Hell, a film from 1980 that I had never heard about. And yeah, this was an interesting watch. The best way I could describe this, and I am going to be jumping into spoilers, is by saying this is essentially a hillbilly version of Sweeney Todd. Yes, similar to Sweeney Todd, you have our main characters serving up food that has human meat in the mix. And so what we learn about these individuals in this film, you have our main characters Vincent and Ida, who are a brother and sister pair who run this motel called Motel Hello. And in a very obvious trope, you know, you have the O at the end of hello flickering on and off, giving us Motel Hell. But this is a very strange motel, and honestly there's only one scene in this film that even indicates that this place even operates as a motel. Everything else about it indicates that this place is more of a meat factory and a farm, because at the back part of this motel in their backyard they have a bunch of pigs and they have a full-blown farm. And this is also where our main character Vincent makes meat, because he is a very well-known meat seller in the area, and his meat's just so delicious, and the reason for that is because there's human meat in there. So yeah, an old school version of a hillbilly Sweeney Todd kind of vibe, minus the musical element. This was not a fantastic film. There's so much about the performances, the character logic, the story that is just so messy, so all over the place, and honestly just left me laughing. But also, I found myself kind of bored watching this movie. It wasn't overly exciting, but there were entertaining elements. If you guys have seen me talk about horror here on the channel, you know I'm a huge fan of 80s horror and a lot of schlocky, over-the-top, silly horror, especially in the slasher genre. And when this movie gave me those moments, that's where it really thrived for me. When it was really silly, when it was really ridiculous, I was all in, because the whole premise of these characters, these two people who run this hotel, just capturing people and then, you know, obviously adding their meat to, you know, the stuff that they're serving out to the public, in and of itself is already ridiculous. I mean, I guess it's not that ridiculous, it's more sick than it is ridiculous, but this movie, similar to something like Sweeney Todd, plays it up as a more silly thing, and especially the way they approach it in this film. When our main characters end up capturing people, they end up putting them in the ground like plants. They plant them in the ground and then they cut out their vocal cords, which kind of just leads to them sounding like zombies, like hissing and gargling kind of sounds. And yeah, they end up just having them planted in the ground. They cut their vocal cords and then they start feeding them, and once they're fat enough, they end up hypnotizing them in this very strange scene, breaking their necks with the car that they attach to a bunch of nooses. And yeah, that's when they've decided that they're dead enough and they want to, you know, now use their meat. So it's very interesting. The film in and of itself isn't overly exciting, but it has a silly premise. And when it leans into that, when we have our actors giving very over-the-top schlocky horror performances, very B-horror performances, then yeah, I'm all in for sure, 100%. But there were just so many scenes in this movie that just left me utterly bored, and quite frankly, I was not engaged in a lot of it. And there's just a lot of really stupid logic decisions. Now, again, there's tons of horror films in the 80s that are just like that I have praised, but at least a lot of those goes, especially in the slasher genre, even in the worst of the Nightmare on Elm Street films or the Friday the 13th films, the Chucky films, any of those characters, honestly, even in the worst of those, you still have our main villain, our big iconic character that keeps it engaging, keeps it fun, and keeps it silly, and keeps the kills going. However, in this film, there's not a whole lot of kills. It's just mainly our characters capturing people, whether they were already unconscious from an accident, or they're just unconscious in general from something else, or they made them unconscious with gas, or whatever the case may be. You never really see our characters going out there and killing people. No, you're good. I finished the sentence and then I heard the key, so I stopped. Robert Reed, everybody, the Big Rob Theory, coming on in the middle of a review. Just got home from work. Honey, I'm home. Now we're going to jump into the thoughts of my guest, Terry, in just one moment, but I do just want to talk about what this film actually is outside of what I actually have already said, and that is pretty much that at the very beginning of the film, we end up seeing that there is a couple coming on a motorcycle. They end up crashing. The guy who's driving the motorcycle ends up kind of being knocked unconscious. We see that Vincent, our main character, the creepo, ends up taking this individual, and then the woman that's unconscious after this motorcycle accident ends up being taken back to Vincent and Ida's motel, and there is where things get a little bit weird, because you have her come in and she's told by them as a lie that her boyfriend, the individual on the motorcycle, is dead. And so of course at first she's distraught, she's sad, but she literally says to them that she doesn't know what she should do. Should she go back home to her family, or should she stay there and figure out something else? And that never really made any sense to me, because I think she does imply that, this guy, this boyfriend, was the only person she had. But she just ends up deciding to stay there with this brother and sister hillbilly duo. And over the course of the film, just develops this weird romance with Vincent, our main, old man. This is like a younger woman, and she kind of falls in love with this guy. The sister tries to kill this girl at one point. Then you have this, younger brother cop who's in the mix, who tries to fall in love with this girl, and then he thinks that the older man is forcing him to marry her, and then they end up finding out that the older man is this crazy psycho murderer that wants to slice people up and feed them. The story was a mess. And I've rambled on way longer than intended. So let's go ahead and jump over to what Terry had to say about this movie.
Hey Anthony, and thanks for inviting me on the channel again to review the 1980 comedy horror film Motel Hell, starring Rory Calhoun, Nancy Parsons, and pretty much nobody else you've ever heard of. This one was directed by a guy called Kevin Connor, who directed a whole bunch of interesting films in the 1970s, including At the Earth's Core, starring Doug McClure and Peter Cushing. In this one, Rory Calhoun, I'll tell you more about him a little bit later, plays Farmer Vincent, a guy who runs a farm where he produces and sells smoked meats. He also runs a motel called Motel Hell, which has a very dodgy neon light that says Motel Hell most of the time. The movie's not in any way about the motel. It's about Vincent and his kind of side hustle way of getting the meat. Pretty much what he does is he sets traps on country roads. Then when people crash and die or are injured, Vincent kind of harvests them for his business. Now, this is a pretty stupid thing to do, because raising pigs isn't that difficult. I lived on a pig farm when I was a kid, and it's not that difficult. The pigs like making more pigs. You feed them pretty much anything, and you just let them go wandering around until you're ready to harvest them. Vincent is doing this the hard way. I'm not going to spoil how he does it, but he does it in an interesting way. His estranged brother is one of the local police officers who, at the start of the film, decides to start doing his job. There's also a young lady who is one of Vincent's victims, who doesn't die, but Vincent takes her back home and kind of tries to make her part of the family and kind of sort of gets engaged to her. It's got a lot of the things you want in a horror movie from the 1980s and 1970s. This is on the cusp of both, of course. It's got gratuitous nudity, it's got gore, it's got icky situations, it's got over-the-top acting, and it's got more than a little bit of uncomfortable horror, some of which dives into body horror as well. Now, here's the problem with the film. It's neither fish nor fowl. It doesn't know whether it wants to be a full-on comedy or whether it wants to be a full-on horror film. So it kind of sits on the fence a little bit on this, and that's a little bit disappointing. I think that it should have really committed to being one or the other. to really kind of leaning into the comedy or leaning into the horror, but not kind of being a bit dithery about both. Having said that, there is an excellent chainsaw fight in this movie, and I'm a fan of chainsaw fights in movies. There's a really good one in a 1968 Rod Taylor film called Dark of the Sun, which I highly recommend as well. But chainsaw fights in movies, I'm always there for. And this one is really cut well and directed well and builds the tension. So it leans into the horror aspect of things a little bit there, but it still wants you to laugh at things that it thinks are funny but aren't really enormously funny. It's kind of in the middle there, which is I think it's a missed opportunity. It could have been either a really good full-on balls-to-the-wall horror film, or it could have been a funny horror comedy, but it doesn't quite get there in either case. Now, speaking of Rory Calhoun, the older actor who plays Farmer Vincent in this, been doing my homework on him for you. When he divorced his first wife in 1970, they had fault divorce, so you had to prove reason why you divorced. And so his ex-wife named 79 women with whom he had extramarital affairs. 79. And when he was interviewed about this, he said she missed half of them. So Rory Calhoun wasn't known as much for an actor as for taking his trousers off in horizontal situations. Never a great actor. He did westerns in the 1950s and had an opportunity to get a career, and did a few sword and sandal epics in the 1960s. But for the most part, his career is kind of a missed opportunity. I don't know whether it was because he didn't care enough. I don't know whether he didn't have the talent. But he does okay as Farmer Vincent. But I think there was an edge there that just needed to be a little bit sharpened, that he either didn't want to do, or wasn't asked to do, or wasn't able to do. So I think this one's about a 50-60% rating for me. If you like 1970s, 1980s horror, you're probably going to get a bit out of it, but it's not at the top drawer of those things. It's still worth watching, by all means, and it's got a couple of moments of really creepy horror. There's also one of the extras in it playing one of the victims of Farmer Vincent is John Ratzenberger, who played Cliff in Cheers. So it's always nice seeing people just making a buck before they became famous on television. So again, Anthony, thank you very much for the opportunity to talk about Motel Hell. Hope everybody over there is staying well, and I'll catch you next time.
A big thanks to Terry for being here in this video. I loved hearing your thoughts, man, and I just love that this is what happened and that this is what we ended up reviewing. So a big thanks to Terry for joining me as usual. I've had him on here before for the John Wick movies in the past, and that's been a lot of fun. So yeah, definitely check out some of those videos, but most importantly, go check out Terry's channel. The link to his channel is down below in the description box, and yeah, he's got tons of great content over there, and he's growing very, very fast. So to wrap up my thoughts on Motel Hell, for me this is a film that was incredibly messy in its story. The characters are making illogical decisions from beginning to end, but I think what really took me out of this film was just that a lot of the scenes felt kind of pointless and I just found myself bored. Ultimately, I'm a big fan of schlocky horror comedy, ridiculous horror, especially 80s horror. And this film does have some good moments of practical effects, but it does also have some terrible moments of practical effects. Ultimately, this is not a film with fantastic performances or really all that exciting moments. This is a pretty generic film. There really isn't much to this film that really keeps me engaged. And overall, I just feel like had there been more silliness to it, more big kills, more moments like when the swingers show up to their motel and think it's a swingers motel and they end up capturing them. If there was more moments like that in the film, I think I would have found myself far more engaged in the film than I really did. But ultimately, the film was just a little repetitive after a while. You know, we don't really see them capture all that many people in the film. There really isn't too much of a horror element to this film. There is a horror aesthetic, and there is some pretty cool horror music from time to time, but then there's also moments in the music and also moments in the aesthetic and also moments in the dialogue and just the overall feel and vibe that take you out of that horror element. And I just kept thinking to myself, when is something really big gonna happen? I didn't care for any of the characters, and again, it wasn't even dumb enough to be it's so bad it's good. It was just kind of boring, and I feel like they didn't really take this concept to the fullest potential that it could have been taken to. Really quickly, I have some notes here of some of the people that were in the film, and I just kind of want to address them individually. First of all, the director, Kevin Conner, not somebody I'm familiar with, but after looking through their filmography, it looks like majority of the stuff that they're working on today is, funny enough, TV movies and things like Hallmark Christmas TV movies, which is really interesting to see how somebody's career can change so much. We also have Rory Calhoun in the film as the main character, Vincent, and I think he gives the biggest performance, the best performance, the most hammy, schlocky, campy performance in the film, and he's definitely the one that you engage with the most. So I think that his casting was definitely solid throughout the film, and he's definitely what kept me the most engaged. His sister is played by Nancy Parsons. She plays Ida, and you know, she's fine. Nothing really crazy there. The character Bruce, who's the cop in this, man, what a cringy character. He's played by Paul Linke, and yeah, he just didn't really work for me. Him trying to kind of like get with the character of Terry, played by Nina Axelrod. Yeah, not really feeling that whole part of the story. It was just very strange, very, very strange. And then the character of Terry, played by Nina Axelrod, like I said, she wasn't really great in her performance. She was not very believable in any way, shape, or form. She was just generic blonde girl of the 80s, essentially. And just the way that she kind of handles her, you know, boyfriend or person dying, and the fact that she just kind of stays there and then falls in love with this brother-sister duo and then falls in love with the brother and wants to stay there and get married. It's just weird. It just doesn't make any sense. Her character is a hot mess, and ultimately, that's just how I feel about this movie. But I'm glad I checked it out. It's always cool to see something I've never seen before, especially in the Halloween season. So, have you seen Motel Hell? Is this a movie that you throw on every year for Halloween, or are you like me and never heard of this movie ever before? It is available on Pluto TV, which is where I saw it for free, at least as of right now when I'm filming this. It was with ads, but yeah, it was free. So, Motel Hell, check it out if you want to, but it's not something I can recommend throwing it on your Halloween list for the year. A big thanks to you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.